Hello and welcome to another Let's Play of Star Trek Infinite. This time we're going to be doing the opening hours of the Romulan campaign. And then there's going to be a second part, which I will be releasing exclusively to patrons. So if you want to see the second part, please consider becoming a patron. And then any subsequent episodes that I decide to make will also be Patreon exclusives. I'm still debating on whether or not I'm going to try doing the Cardassian campaign. It's really going to come down to how much time I have. So we'll see. If I do the Cardassian campaign, same deal will apply. I will do the first part, covering the first, maybe 2-ish hours of gameplay, and release that to the public, and then any subsequent episodes will then also be Patreon exclusives. So let's go ahead and get started with the Romulan campaign of Star Trek Infinite. So first and foremost, the Romulans are my personal favorite alien race in all of Star Trek. Pretty much whenever any Star Trek game gives me an option to play as the Romulans, I will choose to be a Romulan. So basically with Star Trek Infinite, so not exactly. With Star Trek Infinite and with other games, what I'll do is usually the default campaign or default story or whatever is with, Federation or Starfleet. I'll play that at least for a little bit to learn the game and get the basics. And then as soon as I feel like I have a handle on the game at all, I'll usually start a new campaign with the Romulans. And that's what I did with Star Trek Infinite. And then got my ass handed to me multiple times. Because the Romulan campaign is quite difficult and has challenges in it that the other factions do not have. Okay, so for those of you who haven't watched the other Let's Plays, don't know how this game works, I'm going to let you listen to some of the tutorial narration, but I'm also going to interject occasionally with my own commentary on a few things, because these are prime opportunities to talk about some of this stuff. So I'm not going to give you a time code to skip straight to where the main commentary happens, because I'm going to be occasionally jumping in and saying a few things. So,
approximately 3 centuries, the most powerful civilization will automatically be named the Victor. Jolan True, Star Emperor. A Romulan understands all things have their place and time, cruelty and kindness, laughter and sorrow, ruthlessness and mercy. Well, perhaps not mercy, especially for rulers who fail. Keep AI advice on. Tips are enabled. The government screen shows our current ruler, values, and any modifiers that may be affecting the day-to-day functioning of our civilization. Our demographics data can also be viewed in the tab below. The Demographics tab breaks down our civilization by population data. It shows how much we have grown, which traits are most commonly observed among our pops, and any modifiers that might change how our citizens perform or could affect their quality of life.
So I am going to make one small interjection here, which is to point out that on the demographics screen here, we can see that the Romulan Star Empire only consists of Romulan population points. So an interesting omission in this game is that the Reman race is not featured at all. The planet Remus is here in the game, and if I click on it, you'll see that it is uninhabited, and I don't even think it might not even be able to be terraformed. It's considered a barren world, and considered uninhabitable.
The planet summary screen shows us important details about a world and its people, including its districts, resource production, and consumption rates, current levels of stability, and planetary designation. If any have been set, planets can be set to be automatically managed here as well. Construction permitted. Edicts are proclamations that change the priorities of our economy through the weight of law. Most edicts carry a penalty, which can be viewed in the tooltip. Our edict is infallible. Our edict is infallible. Policies are the laws to which our government and citizens are bound. Though nothing is set in stone, some legal positions cannot be taken by every type of government, and some may be further limited by our level of technology. The Leaders menu is where we can hire, dismiss, or assign governors, scientists, admirals, generals, and spies in need of work. Spies are not immediately available upon game start due to extenuating political circumstances in the galaxy. If they are still unavailable at the time of this message, they will return shortly. Technologies are where we will dedicate the majority of our research. There are few limits to what our scientists can discover. It is recommended to keep each research slot filled with a scientist whose traits best suit them for their field of study. Once research has been assigned, a priority can be set which will place that technology at the forefront of our efforts.
Another interesting and frustrating decision that the developers made with Star Trek Infinite is, for some reason, the Romulans don't start the game with the cloaking device. This is something that I do not understand at all. Like, when you think of the Romulans in Star Trek, their, defining characteristic is that they have the cloaking device. Like, almost every Star Trek game that I've ever played that features the Romulans as, a faction or whatever, or playable race or whatever, their ability is the cloaking device. Even in board games, right? You get to roll your attack dice before the other player does and kill their ships in a first strike if you're the Romulans, because you have the cloaking device. I do not understand why this game forces the player to have to actually research the cloaking device. And something that is a particular frustration is the research in Stellaris is randomized. I've tried Romulan campaigns where the cloaking device doesn't even show up as a tech that's available to research for hours into the game. And that's immensely frustrating, because that takes away, the Romulans' biggest tactical advantage, because their ships, or at least most of the early game ships, are not particularly strong. They have a pretty weak military overall in this game. So, basically, what I ended up doing for this campaign specifically is I kept re-rolling until the cloaking device just showed up as one of the first techs in the game, because, quite frankly, you shouldn't even have to research it at all. You should start the game with it, especially at this time in Star Trek history. If this game started in the original series era, this would be a different conversation. And then maybe you could make the argument that it should start the game as being available to research. But there's no world in which the Romulans should not be able to either start the game with the cloaking device or research the cloaking device immediately after the game begins. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Every starbase we construct gives us the right to rule over a new star system. We can also claim starbases built by other species we wish to undermine or destroy. Star bases can be upgraded to include shipyards and other valuable modules. Their presence in a system also grows our borders and increases the warp range of our starships. Once a star base is built, and that system falls under our hegemony, we are free to build research and mining stations there, or to terraform and settle any worlds that may be hospitable to life. Fleets are the main space combat forces of the Romulan Star Empire. Whether composed of few ships or many, our formations always have the technological advantage over our enemies. An admiral should ideally be assigned to command each individual fleet. This is our construction ship, which is used for building orbital stations. Once a star system has been fully surveyed, we can order our construction ship to move there and build research and mining stations if the relevant deposits exist in the system's orbital bodies. Though most of these processes are automated, the raw materials still need to be transported to their destinations. This is our governorship. Its speciality is that it can be sent on missions to help our colonies achieve specific economic or military goals. Governors can also be sent to complete unique special projects that are of personal importance to them. Our galaxy is a puzzle, just waiting to be solved. Most vessels cannot travel to the edge of the map, with the exception of science ships. A starship's warp range determines the maximum reach it can move in a given direction. A ship's warp range is determined by its proximity to the nearest starbase. Building starbases will increase our overall warp bubble, allowing us to position our fleets wherever gives us the greatest advantage. Diplomatic constraints, such as closed borders, will decrease a starship's warp range. Although if it comes to that, we will likely already have plans in motion to eliminate those species. While this map is open, clicking on another civilization's territory can provide some basic information about them. Changing the map mode can reveal different information, such as others' opinions of us, AI attitude, and more.
Okay, well now we're kind of more into the game proper. So first I'm going to talk about my general overall strategy, and then I'll talk a little bit more about why I like the Romulans so much. So my basic plan for this game is basically I'm going to be building up my military as defense against any possible Klingon counterattacks to try to retake Khitomer. On the easier difficulties, this almost never happens. The AIs in this game are pretty passive. But another thing that I'm going to do is I need to try to make sure that I keep my economy balanced. I learned a lot about how the economy in this game works from playing the Klingon campaign. If you saw that, there for some reason, like an hour or so into the game, the Klingon economy just crashes, and you start, losing like 100 energy like per month for like no apparent reason. I still have not figured out why that happens. The Romulans don't have anything like that happen, but their economy is pretty weak overall, and their military is pretty weak.
This is our science ship. These vessels are on the cutting edge of Romulan technology, each outfitted for the purposes of rapidly surveying star systems for resources, researching anomalies, and completing special projects.
So I just need to make sure that I keep everything like in the green and I don't fall into the red and end up in trouble. The other thing that I'm going to do, and this is something that I also learned from experience from playing this campaign multiple times, is I am going to be focusing most of my expansion towards the galactic east deeper into the Beta Quadrant near the Klingon Empire.
Notifications are small, round icons that appear at the top of the screen to give updates on current events. Open notifications with left-click to make important decisions or to view the actions of other civilizations in the galaxy. Right-click notifications to dismiss them.
And the reason for that is because every other time I've tried playing this campaign, and I expand kind of in all directions, northwest and east, the Cardassians come after me hard over some of the planets that I colonize that are near the Cardassian sphere of influence in that upper left corner of the screen there. So I'm going to explore those planets, see if there's anything particularly good. I mean, there's an M-class planet right there with 12 population available to it, for Pete's sake. That would be wonderful to colonize, and I think I will be colonizing it in this game, but I'm not going to claim very many other planets in that part of the map because I don't want the Cardassians invading me, because a Cardassian invasion is pretty difficult to repel, especially with the Romulans starting in such a weak position like they start with. So most of my exploration and expansion efforts are going to be to the galactic east, to the right side of the map, on the screen, and it's fine. There's going to be plenty of planets over there for me to colonize, and I don't consider the Klingons to be nearly as dangerous as the Cardassians are. Of course, in actual Star Trek, the Cardassians and the Romulans should not be sharing a border at all. This map is kind of skewed a little bit, where, the Klingons and the Romulans are kind of rotated almost 45 degrees counterclockwise to where they should be. The Klingons should be more to the galactic south, and the Romulans should be just north of the Klingons, but the Romulans should be entirely in the Beta Quadrant, which means that the entire Romulan Empire should be to the galactic east of Sol. And you can see Sol here on the board in the middle of Federation territory, and Romulus is actually to the west of Sol. Romulus is more in the Alpha Quadrant than Earth is in this game, which is just completely wrong. The Romulan Star Empire should be entirely in the Beta Quadrant, maybe have a little bit of holdings, at the edge of the Alpha Quadrant, but they shouldn't absolutely not be sharing borders with the Cardassians.
Construction success.
And also, the neutral zone should be a straight line curving around Romulan space at the Federation border. It shouldn't be this weird block of four systems like it is in the game. So another weird thing, I think the reasoning for this is just that the designers just wanted there to be more early game conflict, and they wanted every faction to be sharing borders with, multiple other factions so that potential conflict could happen in multiple different directions. And then the neutral zone acts as a little bit of a buffer so that the Federation isn't really doesn't completely share a border with the Romulans, but there can still be conflict between the Federation and the Romulans in this game. So it's a creative liberty that the developers took with the Star Trek lore, Star Trek canon. I disagree with it. I would have preferred to have seen a map that is more accurate to actual Star Trek maps, but it's just another one of those things, like the tech tree and unlocking of starships and stuff like that. That's just weird and anachronistic, and that's done for gameplay first and authenticity to the source material second. At the start of this video, I mentioned how the Romulans are my favorite faction, or my favorite alien race in Star Trek, and it's kind of difficult for me to explain why. For one thing, I love the design of Romulan ships. I love the original series Bird of Prey. Balance of Terror is my favorite episode of the original series. It's probably my favorite episode in all of Star Trek. I love the Bird of Prey original design, and then I definitely love the Romulan Warbird in the Next Generation, the design of that ship. That's my favorite non-Starfleet ship in all of Star Trek. It's the refit Enterprise, right, is number one. and then maybe like the Enterprise D is like my second favorite Star Trek ship, and then it's the Romulan Warbird. And in fact, I might even like the Romulan Warbird more than I like the Enterprise D. I love it that much. It's just such a cool design, just like huge, imposing, but also like a really unique profile in all of Star Trek, because it just has that huge empty space, in the middle of it, just all that dead space. But it still has that imposing, bird-like figure and silhouette to it that, makes it look like a vicious, predatory kind of starship. And then, of course, I love the cloaking device as a concept. I love how, like, the Romulans are always depicted as being, like, very, like, secretive and, like, they kind of sit in the shadows and don't really, like... They don't really strike first, usually. They wait for the other... they wait for their enemies to, like, make a mistake. And then they pounce on that mistake and take advantage of it, right? And that's, like, the primary impetus of, like, all of their foreign policy, is to probe the enemy for weakness and then let them screw up, right? And then punish them for having screwed up. Don't ever go in half-cocked, right? And if the Romulans are going to attack, like, they're going to have, like, overwhelming force, and, right, like, they're going to just crush you, right? Like, that's kind of how they operate. I like them being this offshoot of, like, the Vulcans. I think that's a really cool idea, how they're, like, almost this opposite of the Vulcans, where the Vulcans are logical and dispassionate. The Romulans are this very deeply emotional and spiritual people with very deep-running passions. But yet, they also still come off as being very controlled, right? They're not, like, stoic like the Vulcans are, but, Romulans can be difficult to read, right? Like, they have emotions, they have very strong emotions, they're not afraid of showing those emotions, but at the same time, like, they don't let those emotions, be, like, super obvious, right? Like, anytime you're dealing with a Romulan, you just have no way of knowing, how honest and forthcoming they're being. Like, they always have plots going on in the back of their mind, so they're always just this kind of, like, mystery wild card kind of character. So, I always find that really appealing and really interesting. I like how they also have kind of like a martial culture. It's like this, like, it's like part Roman, right? But not... like, it's like part ancient Rome, part Soviet Russia, right? And I think that also makes for an interesting combination, right? They've got the spying and the espionage stuff going on, but, then also, similar to the Klingons, they have their own, like, sense of honor, right? And a code of conduct that informs the way they operate at both a personal level and as in terms of government policy. So, I just think they're a really interesting, really rich culture in Star Trek, and I love them for that.
Tradition to unravel our deeper mysteries. The Traditions screen is where we can view our civilization's tradition trees. A tradition tree must be adopted in order to access its traditions. Adopting individual traditions costs unity, which is produced by buildings and jobs, or earned by completing certain events. A significant amount of unity is required to unlock both tradition trees and the traditions they contain. So it is wise to stockpile as much of this valuable resource as possible.
All right, so we just unlocked our first tradition already, and something that I had not noticed in earlier playthroughs, which I want to point out now, was that each of these tradition trees have faction-specific traditions. And that's in addition to, like, their main, faction tree, which in the case of the Romulans is secrecy. For the Klingons, I think it's like honor or something like that. But I think these are supposed to encourage the player to play with a particular play style for a particular faction. But it's yet another one of those things that, like, just I would not have done things the way that the designers of this game did them. I would have made different choices if I were Nimble Giant. For the Romulans, for example, they put their special Romulan traditions in the conquest, development, and welfare trees. And I agree with the welfare policy, because, Reman slavery is a big part of Romulan culture. At least it is after Star Trek Nemesis retconned the Reman race into existence. But then, of course, this game doesn't have Remans in the game at all. So, like, what are you supposed to do with that tradition? But I strongly disagree with the other two. Yes, the Romulans are militaristic, but I feel that their unique military tradition should have been on the defense tree instead of the conquest tree. The Romulans are rarely, as I mentioned before, the Romulans are rarely an offensive-minded people. They prefer to bait their rivals into making an aggressive move, and then they defend against that. And then they also wait for their opponent to make a mistake, and then take advantage of that mistake. And this is especially true in the TNG and DS9 eras, where the Romulans are a lot more reserved and operating in the shadows. They were a lot more aggressive in the Enterprise and original series eras, with the sneak attack and balance of terror, and then also the Earth-Romulan War, which we still have never actually seen on screen. That could potentially be a good subject for some new Star Trek series on streaming, but I don't know if we're ever going to see that. And then their attempts to destabilize the relations between Earth, Vulcan, Andor, and Tellar, which we saw in Star Trek Enterprise. But even then, those attacks were always designed more to test the opponent's offensive and defensive capabilities, rather than to deliberately start an outright war. If they found the Federation to be weak and unable to counter the cloaking device and the enveloping plasma weapon, then yes, they probably would have started a war after Balance of Terror. But if the cloaking device did not prove itself to be an overwhelming advantage, they had no intent of starting a war, right? And the Romulan commander self-destructs his ship and lets it be destroyed, rather than there being any perception that the mission was successful. And I get the feeling that that was part of his standing orders. So I would have put the unique Romulan tradition in the defense tree, probably having something to do with like buffing ship combat in battles that take place like near the enemy border or within Romulan space or something like that. Or I don't know, maybe even automatically damaging enemy ships that cross into Romulan space, something like that. And then as for the research and development trees, I think the Romulans should definitely be more inclined to take something in the research tree. Another common Romulan stereotype is that they are very smug and arrogant, and they act as if they invented every major technology before everyone else. And in some cases, this is actually true. Like, it's true for the cloaking device, it's true for the plasma torpedoes, it's true for their quantum singularity drives, and so forth. Like, those are all Romulan inventions. And ever since the Romulans have been reintroduced in TNG, they have been, the technological equals or technologically superior to the Federation in many respects. So I definitely would have put a unique tradition on the research tree. Maybe something about like getting a significant buff towards researching technologies that other factions had already possessed. That way it's harder for them to fall behind. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe a buff towards researching technologies that the other factions don't have, so that they potentially get them first. And that would also be a benefit towards getting the cloaking device earlier in the game, rather than later. So, those are things that I would have considered.
Construction successful.
So whenever I get a mission like this, Taurons and Rust, where I have the option between either getting a one-time lump sum of a resource or like a permanent buff to a planet, like the key decision point for me is whether or not I plan on actually colonizing that planet. So in this case, Nova Minra, if that's how you pronounce that, it is a system that I will likely be colonizing, right? Because there's a buffer between it and the Klingon Empire. So I'm going to add the +3 minerals to that planet so that I'll get a long-term buff over the course of the entire game. And depending on how soon I colonize that planet, I should end up with way more minerals in the long run over the course of the game than I would have gotten if I just accepted the lump sum. And then there's also these decisions about like how to treat alien life, and being that the I'm going to role play this a little bit, being that the Romulans have that stereotype of being kind of smug and feeling superior. I'm going to role play into that, and a lot of the decisions that I'm going to make are going to be putting Romulan life, on a pedestal above other forms of life. So other aliens are going to be subservient species in this playthrough. And I'm also going to be playing these events with a very suspicious nature. So anytime I have like an opportunity to like arrest or detain someone or study something from afar, as opposed to getting directly involved in it, I'm going to make that decision as well, like I just did here with the chromatic vortex.
Research finalized. Our technological genius amazes even us.
And here we have researched the cloaking device. I'm going to go next for the plasma launcher, because that seems like, the most thematic thing to go for. I don't have an opportunity right away to use the cloaking device, but I do intend to use it before this episode ends. I'm not going to be attacking the Klingons. I'm definitely not going to be attacking the Cardassians. I'm not really in a position to attack the Federation because of that neutral zone buffer. But I do intend to use that cloaking device to attack at least one minor race faction. Right now I have several first contacts pending, so, once those are resolved, I'm going to be picking one to, just pick on and test out how well that cloaking device works in battle, which, spoiler alert, isn't particularly great. So now we have the Khitomer report available. So I have the opportunity to either frame the House of Moog or extort the Duras family for money. I'm going to stay roleplay in the canon. I'm going to frame the House of Moog. Again, this game starts with the Khitomer massacre, which puts it in between the events of Star Trek VI and the start of the Next Generation. If you wanted to play a game where you get to start out in like the original series or Enterprise eras and actually like explore the galaxy, unfortunately this game doesn't let you do that. When the game first came out, and I realized that,
Spyship, a stealth vessel engineered to navigate through space undetected and quietly sabotage our inferiors without them ever knowing. Its warp range extends through the borders of any civilization we have contacted. These vessels should ideally be helmed by spies and may travel covertly through other civilizations' territory for the purposes of espionage, such as gathering intel or conducting secret operations. Espionage is not limited to other empires, as some operations can be conducted within our own borders. Operations can be both offensive and defensive in nature, and may include spreading propaganda, stealing enemy blueprints, hacking starbases, or counter-espionage. Note that our intel on a civilization must reach a certain level before some operations can be conducted.
I had hoped that there would be expansions and DLC that would add original series content and push the start of the game, back to an earlier period in Star Trek canon. But of course, that didn't happen. This game is dead in the water. Paradox ended support for it, shut down the studio, laid off all the staff. This game is getting no further updates. Alright, and having finished the Khitomer report, we now unlock a spy ship. So again, this is another thing that I like about the Romulans as a faction. I like this emphasis on, cloak and dagger, spying and espionage. Whenever I play, strategy games like this, I always like to send out, scouts and recon and stuff like that, and I always watch the borders. Whenever I play, Civilization, I'll always have, a line of, frigates or destroyers out by the, other continents, just watching the movements of the other, factions in the game. Because that's just the way that I like to play a lot of these games, and so that, really feeds right into the way that the Romulans operate in actual, Star Trek canon. So the first thing that I'm going to do with my spy ship is I'm going to start looking around the Klingon systems. I want to check the strength of the Klingon fleet, see how it compares to mine, because, with the direction that I'm expanding, I'm going to be expanding my influence into the Klingon sphere of influence as well. So there's going to be potential conflict. I want to make sure that my fleet keeps parity with the Klingon fleet. So I'm going to send my spies in there to try to look for the Klingon fleets, find out how big they are, and then that's going to be the target for how, at least how big I want my fleets to be. And then I'll also, hopefully have the advantage of the cloaking device, which should, give me the ability to make preemptive strikes and hopefully damage or cripple any, potential invading Klingon fleet before they get to hit me. And then just hope that the Cardassians don't come in the back door. Okay, so now I have first contact with a minor faction, which means I have what is probably going to be my first war target. And, they are on the galactic east, so conquering them means gaining territory that is along the Klingon border, not the Cardassian border. So, again, it spares me from having to worry as much about a potential Cardassian invasion, which is something that I definitely don't want to happen. So by the end of this episode, my intent will be to have conquered Kesprit. And, enslave the population. Because that's how we Romulans roll.
Construction successful.
And you'll notice that the Cardassians actually did colonize that M-class planet. I'm going to go ahead and claim Sen Vadi, which is just to the north of there. And that's, I think that's going to be as far west as I'm going to go. Which is unfortunate because, Soth Von, which is, directly to the southwest of that, it looks like it's got 2 M-class planets, which would be a real great system to control, but that's probably exactly the kind of system that the Cardassians would not be too happy with me claiming because they probably want it for themselves. So that would probably be the spark that would ignite war with the Cardassians if I claim that system. So I'm going to be very reluctant to claim that system, at least early in the game. If the Cardassians don't take it for some reason, maybe I'll come back and take it later. But, I'm pretty sure they're going to colonize that system as well. I'm still going to explore and survey all these systems just to find out what's there, in case I want to circle back to it later. But this is about as far west as I want to go.
A new tradition to unravel our deeper mysteries.
And here again, I have the opportunity to take that slavery tradition, and if the Reman race were in the game and I could make them slaves, I probably would have taken that one. But since they're not in the game and I don't have any alien population points yet that I could enslave, like there's no point in taking that. So I'll go ahead and take stuff that's in the Romulan, tradition tree, the secrecy tradition tree. Alloy production is one of the things for the Romulans that is particularly weak, especially in this campaign. So I'm going to be buying a lot of alloys because, again, I need to build ships in order to maintain parity with the Klingons. I do not want to be too weak and just invite attack from the Klingons or Cardassians, because one thing that the AI factions in this game will do is they will make opportunistic attacks. On the normal and easy difficulties, they play very passively, but if you completely neglect your military, they will declare surprise wars on you, and they will mess you up.
Tracking alien vessel. We have surveyed a new astronomical region.
So here is at least part of the Klingon fleet, and they've got well over 1,000 points of military strength here, which is pretty worrisome, because if you look at my military fleets, I barely have 400. So the Klingon fleet is well over twice as powerful as the Romulan fleet here this early in the game. So I definitely need lots and lots of alloys so that I can build ships and be able to defend myself if the Klingons come after me and decide they want revenge for Khitomer. And now I finally have enough resources for a second spy. So now I can, go check out the Cardassians as well, find out what the strength of their fleet is, how they're deployed and positioned, to make sure that I don't have to worry about them. And then I'm going to start, probably doing whole lot of, I'm going to do the smear campaigns, and I'm going to be siphoning a lot of energy. Because the smear campaigns give you influence points, which is used for expanding your borders. And then, of course, siphoning energy gives me money. So, and I want to pit these other factions against each other, like particularly the Cardassians. I want the Cardassians to be hostile towards other factions so that they're not messing with me.
The mission tree shows the branching paths of our civilization's possible past and future histories. Each node describes a specific consequence of the events that fundamentally changed or will change the character of our star empire. Proceed wisely. Time is a labyrinth of infinite corridors.
And now, having a second spy also unlocks the first Romulan mission. So, these mission tree, every faction has these. They're unique to each faction. They kind of tell the story of the game for each faction. For the Romulan one, a lot of it has to do with espionage and your relationships with other factions. Specifically, the decision of whether or not to continue playing secretively and selfishly, or whether you want to open yourself up to relationships with other factions. Particularly, there's an entire tree here about reunifying with Vulcans, which of course is a major plot line. Well, maybe not a major plot line, but a minor plot line in Star Trek Next Generation. I think Sela just disappears. I don't think we ever actually get a resolution to Sela's character. We had Star Trek Generations, which kills Lursa and B'Etor, and kind of puts a capstone on the Sins of the Father story arc. It's kind of disappointing that we never got a TNG movie featuring Sela as a villain that, puts a capstone on her storyline and on the unification plot line with the Vulcans, and maybe even would have been an opportunity to get Leonard Nimoy back in the role of Spock for another feature film. But anyway, on the other side of this tree is the big event of the game for the Romulans, which is the explosion of the Romulan sun and destruction of the Romulan homeworld, which is something that happens in this game and happens surprisingly early in the game. So yes, the Romulan sun is going to explode, and the Romulan player is basically going to have the option of either dealing with it themselves or letting in Federation help, and then that's supposed to be a bridge towards peaceful relationships with the Federation. Of course, this relates, very closely to the 2009 Star Trek reboot movie, in which the destruction of Romulus was entered into canon, and then also it has a lot to do with the Star Trek Picard television series, because the first season of that in particular deals heavily with the aftermath of the destruction of the Romulan homeworld. But before I get in, and I want to talk a lot about Star Trek Picard, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about this event itself, because there's ambiguity and confusion within Star Trek canon and the fan base about what exactly happens. You may or may not remember, in the 2009 Star Trek movie, Spock basically just says, a star explodes, like somewhere in the galaxy. And that explosion ends up destroying the Romulan homeworld. He does not specifically say that it is the Romulan sun that explodes. In fact, the implication is that it must not be the Romulan sun, because he talks about how after it explodes, they do all the research into like red matter, and they build a whole ship, and then he has to go and try to suck it up into a black hole. But like, if the Romulan sun exploded, that would, it would destroy the Romulan homeworld in like a matter of minutes, right? Like, not enough time to research red matter, figure out how to use it, and then build a ship and warp it to even in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek warp rules. That's not enough time to warp from Vulcan to Romulus. And then, of course, the other big problem is, like, so what? So you suck up the supernova into a black hole before it destroys Romulus? Like, so what have you accomplished? Now, the Romulan homeworld still doesn't have a star, doesn't have a sun. Now it just has a black hole in place of where the sun used to be. So it's a dark, frozen wasteland of a world where no one can live. Like, how does that save the Romulan homeworld? So, a lot of people who saw that movie just assumed that they were talking about the Romulan sun, but when you stop and think about it, it really doesn't make any sense for the reasons that I just mentioned. So, there were then comic books that were released, and also the video game Star Trek Online, which posited an alternative explanation, which is that it is not the Romulan sun that explodes, it is a neighboring star called Hobus that explodes, and Hobus isn't even on this map here, so I can't point out to you where it is. And that resolves a lot of the problems, right? If it's not the Romulan sun that explodes, then hypothetically you can save the Romulan homeworld and also its star, and, the world would still be inhabitable. Of course, you then get another problem, which is that, like, even a really close star, right? Like, the closest star to Earth is, like, Proxima Centauri, I think, which is, like, 4 light years away, I want to say. Yeah, 4.24 light years. So, if Proxima Centauri were to suddenly explode and go supernova, and that shockwave were to travel at or very close to the speed of light, it would still take 4 or 5 years for that shockwave to get here. So, assuming that we're able to know that the star exploded, before the light gets here, if we were an interdimensional warp-capable species, and we know that that's happening, we'd have 4 or 5 years to do something about it. And it would probably take even longer than that, because that shockwave is not going to be traveling at the speed of light. It's going to be traveling substantially slower. Like, it might take 400 years for that shockwave to get to Earth. So, if instead of the Romulan sun exploding, you have a neighboring star exploding, then, like, you need to explain, like, well, how the heck is it blowing up Romulus like a surprise to anybody, right? Like, you should have years or decades or centuries of warning that this star has gone supernova and its shockwave is coming. So I think the other way that Star Trek Online and other source material basically explains that away is that there's some peculiar properties of the star such that its shockwave actually travels at warp speeds. It's like a subspace shockwave or something like that. So, whatever. Star Trek, sci-fi magic. Hand-wavy explanation. So, maybe they don't have years or decades or centuries. Maybe they have just like a matter of months or days or something like that.
Anomaly detected.
But now, then Star Trek Picard comes along, and Star Trek Picard, like, it doesn't explicitly say that the Romulan sun exploded, but they do specifically say the Romulan supernova in Star Trek Picard. I mean, they could, that could just be a way of saying the supernova that destroyed Romulus, right? But, like, realistically, if you hear someone say Romulan supernova, it suggests that it is the Romulan sun that went supernova. So the explanation that was given in those comic books and in Star Trek Online has basically been overwritten by Star Trek Picard, so that, yes, it was actually the Romulan sun that exploded, and that is what this game goes along with as well. It is going to be the Romulan sun that explodes, not a neighboring star. I wouldn't exactly call that a retcon, because, again, the 2009 Star Trek movie didn't explain exactly what star exploded. So, and, Star Trek Online and those comic books, they're not canon, right? They're basically just officially licensed fan fiction. So there really wasn't anything to retcon. But now we have this, disagreement. I don't know if it's like a big conflict in the Star Trek fan base, but there's disagreement about which of these explanations should be the canon explanation. Should it be the Romulan sun, or should it be a neighbor? Should it be the Hobus star that exploded? If you go onto the Star Trek wikis, right now, as of the time that I'm recording this, they're going to say it's the Romulan sun, right? You go onto Memory Alpha, it's the Romulan sun. You go onto Memory Beta, which is the wiki of apocryphal and non-canon Star Trek material, you'll find articles about Star Trek Online and the Hobus explosion and stuff like that. But the canon explanation, as of now, is that the Romulan sun explodes. Now, how Spock is able to know that that's going to happen and develop the red matter technology to create a black hole and then build a ship and warp it over to Romulus to try to absorb the supernova, and how exactly that's supposed to help, because like I said, it basically means that instead of a sun, you just have a black hole, so you end up with a frozen, dark, uninhabitable world. I don't know how that's helpful or constructive. So the canon explanation kind of breaks the 2009 Star Trek movie, and the end of Spock Prime's life in Star Trek canon, which is kind of unfortunate that happens. That, these writers, we have all these different writers, all these different chefs in the kitchen who have different ideas, do different things, and they don't really talk to each other or make up their mind on how all this stuff is going to work. I mean, that's the problem that you have when you just make shit up as you go, which is the case with Star Trek. This isn't some master-planned story like friggin' George R.R. Martin writing the Song of Ice and Fire. No, they just make it up as they go, which means there's lots of inconsistencies, lots of things that are just broken, that are difficult to explain. We Star Trek fans are very good at coming up with these ad hoc rationalizations to explain away these things, and I have my own particular headcanon for how I think the destruction of Romulus and the Romulan sun should be explained. And basically, that idea is that the way that I would have written the destruction of the Romulan homeworld. Well, let's back up a little bit and let's actually talk about Star Trek Picard. Because the first season of Star Trek Picard was friggin' awful. I hated it. But even though I hated it, there were a lot of ideas in it that I liked and that I thought were very good ideas for a Star Trek series to pursue. Overall, the overarching plot about the Tal Shiar, what the heck were they even called? Zod Vosh or something like that? Whatever the heck they were called. I forget. I hated all that crap. I hated all the stuff about synthetics. That shit had already been resolved in the Next Generation, and then again in Voyager. We shouldn't be having this discussion of whether androids should have rights as sentient beings or not. That is resolved, legal precedent in Star Trek multiple times. And then worse yet is the just ripping off the plot of Mass Effect with some intergalactic space tentacle monsters that come through and want to destroy all organic life in the universe. All the stuff about Data and his daughter. I would have dropped all that stuff. If I had been in charge of creating the Star Trek Picard television series, I would have made it more about the humanitarian efforts to try to relocate the Romulans after the Romulan sun exploded. And about the moral imperative to take in refugees, right, and to help people in need. Because we have a lot of real world, that's an allegory for a lot of real world situations now. Like, we have these strong anti-immigrant sentiments in the United States, in Europe, and in other countries. And, a lot of people who are coming to the United States and to Europe from places like South America and the Middle East. A lot of them are political refugees. They're coming from war-torn countries where, their homes are being bombed. They're being displaced, and they just want to get away from conflict so they can, live a more normal, peaceful, stable life. And in other cases, they're climate refugees, right? They're people who are coming from, South America, from tropical and desert regions of the world that are getting increasingly hot, increasingly dry, where there are more and more natural disasters. And, like, as Americans and as Europeans, we have a moral imperative to help those people because we are disproportionately responsible for the climate change that is making their home countries less and less livable. It's our fault. And so we should be taking them in. That is what I wished Star Trek Picard were more about. I really liked the Borg Reclamation Project as a concept. I really like that Hugh shows up. I absolutely hate that they murder Hugh for no really good reason. He basically just gets caught in a crossfire. It's one of the worst lessons that Hollywood has learned from the success of Game of Thrones. Is they have this absurd idea that just killing off beloved characters for shock value is good writing, and it's not. It works in Game of Thrones, right? Because George R.R. Martin has all this stuff planned out. There's a goal. There's an end goal for every death that happens in Game of Thrones. Spoiler alert for Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire right here. But, the reason that Ned Stark dies at the end of the first season of Game of Thrones is not just simply for shock value. It is to open up the stories of other characters. It is to open up the story of the Lannisters becoming the rulers of King's Landing, and it is to open up storylines for Stannis Baratheon and others to make them more important players on the stage, as well as being the catalyst for Arya Stark's entire storyline for the rest of the series. In Star Trek Picard, in contrast, Hugh just dies for shits and giggles, right? It's literally just for shock value, just to make the audience feel bad. He's not some noble sacrifice where he's saving the other Borg who he's helped, or anything like that. It's such awful friggin' writing. But anyway, more broadly speaking, what would I have done more specifically in Star Trek Picard? So, I had actually a couple years ago written an entire blog post in which I rewrote all of Star Trek Picard. I invite you to check that out. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description here for you, and if not, maybe in the comments if I remember to do so. But I'll recap some of that here, and then maybe in the next episode I'll talk a little bit more about that stuff in more detail, and also about ideas that I've had in the intervening years, and maybe in response to the second and third seasons of Picard and other Star Trek material that has come out. So basically, how do I think the destruction of Romulus and the Romulan sun should have been written? So, basically, the Romulans are unique in Star Trek canon because their warp drives are not powered by the same matter-antimatter reactors that every other race's warp drives are powered by. Instead, Romulan ships harvest energy from microscopic quantum singularities, basically little black holes. So, in my headcanon, these singularity drives probably could have been the reason for the Romulan sun's explosion. I'm imagining that the Romulans created these singularities by harvesting stellar matter from their own sun for generations, which would have been slowly destabilizing the star. Moreover, I imagine that Romulan scientists knew well in advance that they were shortening the life of their star, but the government largely ignored these warnings, thinking that the threat was not imminent and, always kicking the can down the road for future generations to deal with. After all, they had to maintain military parity with the Federation and with the Klingons, so they couldn't just stop building new warships and new singularity drives. And the singularity drives were a superior energy source that helped power their oversized starships like the intimidating Warbird, and which enabled the Cloaking Device to be powerful enough to cloak these oversized and overpowered ships without being detectable to enemy ships. So it's also not like they could just, switch to a more sustainable source of energy that did not put their home star in jeopardy. At least they couldn't do it easily, not without, high cost and without, losing a lot of the strength and capability of their military fleet. So, hint, hint, wink, wink, if you haven't caught on already, what I'm talking about here is an allegory for anthropogenic climate change. So on the one hand, Star Trek Picard could have used the Romulans to hold up a mirror to our own real-life governments, which refuse to take meaningful action on climate change, even as its effects have become apparent. And it's already started killing people and causing economic damage. I knew that I was going to be talking about this before playing the Romulan campaign, so I actually looked up some of these statistics in advance, and the World Health Organization conservatively estimates that 250,000 people will start dying each year after 2030 due to illness, malnutrition, famine, and heat stress that are all directly attributable to climate change. And that does not include the number of people who will die in natural disasters such as hurricanes and floods, or the number of people who will die in wars that are likely to be caused by drought-stricken countries attacking other countries in order for their water and other resources. If you factor in those deaths, well, then we're already seeing over 300,000 deaths per year from climate change. Similarly, the World Economic Forum has already estimated that climate change has caused over $260 billion in physical damage since 2000. So that would be the cost of things like rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding homes, and rebuilding businesses that have been destroyed by climate change-related weather and disasters, like hurricanes and wildfires and stuff like that. It does not factor in lost economic activity that comes from businesses having to be shut down, or people not shopping and buying things because they have to rebuild their friggin' home after a hurricane. They also estimate that the cost of climate change will rise to between $1 and $3 trillion per year by the year 2050. That is almost 20% of global GDP. Basically, whole countries will be broke by the year 2050 because all of their government revenue will be going toward disaster relief and mitigation due to climate change. And yet, we still have conservative politicians and climate deniers who like to categorize climate and environmental policy as bleeding heart liberal alarmism, but yet this is a very real public health problem. And more importantly, for those conservative politicians and voters, it's an economic problem, right? This is going to basically cut into large chunks of government spending. It's probably going to necessitate raising taxes. And if we don't raise taxes to account for this stuff and government doesn't put in mitigation efforts, then it just means more homes are going to be destroyed, more businesses are going to be destroyed or closed, and more people are going to die. And not only that, but it's a national security problem because it is going to start wars and other conflicts, and it's already leading to, large-scale immigration. So, it's just it's so frustrating, the political discourse surrounding climate change. And like, this is the sort of thing that I really wish that Star Trek Picard had been, or the first season of Star Trek Picard had been all about. Like, not any of the stupid conspiracy nonsense, not any of the stupid interdimensional life-destroying tentacle monster nonsense. You know, none of the stuff about synthetics, you know, and synthetic rights, because like I said before, that stuff is should already be settled law in Star Trek. But I wanted to see, you know, Star Trek Picard addressing these sorts of climate issues, you know, veiled in sci-fi allegory, right? Of the Romulan people exhausting a natural resource to the point of cataclysm, you know, through government ineptitude and, you know, unwillingness to actually confront a problem because it's not politically expedient for them to do so, right? They defer the problem, they just kick it down the road, and it just gets worse and worse and worse until eventually, in this case, it literally explodes in their faces. That's what I wish Star Trek Picard had been about. And then on top of that, you know, have it be more about the moral imperative to help those refugees. I mean, in this case, like, it wouldn't necessarily have been Starfleet's fault that it would not directly be Starfleet's fault that the Romulan sun explodes. Like, Starfleet isn't mining the Romulan sun, but that the hostility between the two factions and the fact that the Romulans felt they needed to maintain military parity with the Federation would mean that the Federation would arguably be indirectly responsible or would have contributed in that sense. So those are kind of my thoughts on, very big picture, what I would have liked to have seen from Star Trek Picard's first season. In the next episode of this Let's Play, I'll actually talk a little bit more in detail about like more specific plot. Again, a lot of it's going to be pulled directly from a blog that I wrote a couple years ago, so, you know, feel free to read that. But I'll have some new insights, new thoughts in the meantime. You know, like, specifically, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about, like, you know, what I liked about the Borg storylines in the first season of Star Trek Picard, and you know, what I would have done with the Borg Reclamation Project, and with the character of Hugh.
Construction successful. Our technological genius amazes even us.
So anyway, as for what's going on in the actual game, one of the things that I've been doing, in addition to kind of starting to prepare for a military invasion of Kesprit, is I've been trying to make peaceful relations with the other minor factions that I've met, particularly the Cairna and the Bolians. So the Bolians are firmly within the Romulan sphere of influence. I should have no problem annexing them or invading them, but I'll probably go ahead and make peace with them and annex them. The Cairna are interesting because they are on the Cardassian border, and I want to maintain peaceful relationships with them so that I can potentially, eventually, perhaps annex them into the Romulan Empire, and then be able to claim territory along the Cardassian border at a point where I feel like I would be militarily capable of withstanding a potential Cardassian attack. Of course, there's also the potential that the Cardassians might either invade or integrate the Cairna, and if that happens, then that potentially gives me a reason to go to war with the Cardassians to liberate them, to liberate the Cairna. So that's basically what I'm doing there. I definitely need some trade partners. My energy income was in the red for quite a while. But now I've got more energy generating infrastructure, and now I've got a couple trade routes with some minor factions. So my energy production is back in the green, which is good because I need to use that energy to buy alloys to build ships.
Our edict is infallible. Our edict is infallible. Our edict is infallible. We will respect your privacy. Mission log updated.
And this is interesting because now I have made first contact with the Ferengi. The Ferengi obviously are not a playable faction in this game, although I really wish they were, because they'd offer a different playstyle that would, really complement and contrast the other factions in the game. But but they're not even really like a minor faction either. Like instead, what you find is just these like different Ferengi merchants. I don't know if there's only one of them or if there might be multiple of them spread across the map, because this is actually the Romulan campaign is actually the first time that I've seen them in the game. But yeah, like you buy various services from them, like training for your fleets and stuff like that. But in order to do so, you have to give them Latinum, and I am not quite sure how you actually generate Latinum. So anyway, as I said before, I'm trying to make peaceful relationships with the Karna and the Bolians. So I did this mission to do this peace summit for the Karna, because missions for minor races is also a very good way to generate like influence and unity and stuff like that. The rewards for a lot of these things are those resources, and their position on the map means it's pretty easy for me to reliably be able to get ships into the area of Karna. It's in range. The neighboring systems are in range of my military ships. Although, thankfully, they had it go to Elven and not to like one of the other systems on like the other side. But also, I think because, and I could be wrong about this, but I think because Elven is the only system that I've explored and surveyed that's adjacent to the Karna, I was pretty confident that that was where any potential mission would be. It would either be at Elven, or it would be with one of the other factions. It would be at Belarus or Kesprit, like they'd ask me to like spy on them or something like that. And if it was going to be in neutral space, then it would be in Elven. I guess maybe it could have been in like Parvok, because that's also adjacent. And that is right now outside of the range of my ships. But in that sense, I could have maybe built a station on one of those systems and maybe not necessarily drawn the wrath of the Cardassians quite yet. So, I felt pretty good about doing that mission and being able to complete it. Because in some cases, you get these missions, and if they require you to send a military ship somewhere and it's outside of your range, I mean, you're just kind of hosed. Like, either you need to build outposts to put that in your range, or you need to share like warp travel with another major faction. I don't think you can share warp travel range with minor factions, so basically I would have to do that with the Cardassians, and like that ain't happening because I'm not friendly with the Cardassians. So,
Construction permitted.
But I felt pretty good about doing that, which is why I requested the mission. I think I might also probably do some missions for the Bolians as well at some point, although that might be a little bit difficult because they're more outside of the range of my fleets, so I'll be doing more missions for the Bolians after I've built some outposts on some of those, systems, directly to the galactic north of Romulus. But anyway, we see the Ferengi here again. What I really do wish that the Ferengi had been in this game as a fifth faction. Like, for one thing, they could have slotted into that space between the Cardassian and the Romulan territory so that the Romulans could have been all the way in the Beta Quadrant. Right, and then, so basically you would shift the Romulan Empire over, into the Beta Quadrant, and then in space in between, which is right now, which is the space between Romulus and the Cardassian borders, that would be where the Ferengi would start the game. And that would be much more accurate to Star Trek maps. But also, like, right now, you basically have the Federation, which, like, plays very peacefully. It's a democratic society, and they basically expand by integrating other, through peaceful relationships and integrating minor factions into the Federation. But then all three of the other factions are basically different flavors of, like, militaristic. Right? Like, the Cardassians and the Klingons are just outright, built around conquering other systems as the primary way for them to expand their borders and expand their empires. The Romulans are a little bit more flexible. The Romulans are still built to be very militaristic, but they are, not as overtly aggressive as the Klingons or the Cardassians are. They're built more for, like, spying and espionage, and for, like, founding their own colonies and stuff like that. Whereas, the Cardassians, also have an espionage theme to them, but they will just invade systems and occupy them and take the population as slaves. Romulans don't necessarily do that, although they do have that slavery tradition that is, like, unique in their tree. So, like, that's what they should be doing if you take that particular tradition. But of course, you don't have to take that tradition. So you don't have to play that way. But then in that sense, having the Ferengi in the game would have been, another faction that is maybe not as overtly militaristic as the Klingons, Romulans, and Cardassians are. The Ferengi could have been built a little bit more similarly to the Federation, except maybe they have a much greater emphasis on accumulating wealth, right, and money and resources and stuff like that, and maybe they also have like some piracy kind of stuff going on, but they could be built around like bribing minor factions into like becoming part of the Ferengi alliance, as opposed to the Federation, who does it slowly, diplomatically. So, I think there was definitely gameplay space, conceptual space, to have put the Ferengi in this game, and they would have fit very well. We would have had exactly the same faction roster as Star Trek Birth of the Federation, which is one of my favorite games ever, and is probably my favorite Star Trek game ever. But, whatever, they missed that opportunity. It's another way in which I feel like the designers kind of dropped the ball here with this game. And there was another thing where I fully expected that the Ferengi would eventually be like a DLC playable faction. But again, that's not happening, unfortunately. At least not, officially. Maybe fans will release mods or whatever, right, that'll add them. One of my hopes is that the people who do the New Frontiers Total Conversion mod for Stellaris will come and like import a lot of that content into this game and make this game play more like New Frontiers, but with all of like the rules and mechanic. Because right now, I have a really hard time. Like, I've tried running the New Frontiers mod on Stellaris recently, and I cannot get it to run. Like, I followed the directions that are on like the FAQs on like the forum threads and stuff like that, and I can get into the game and it will load, but then it just like immediately crashes. Like, none of the UI stuff properly loads. Like, I go into like the faction roster and like it doesn't have all the right factions, so I'm not quite sure what I'm doing wrong. But then on top of that, like, it's only compatible with older versions of Stellaris, so you have to, activate like the beta mode in the Steam settings for Stellaris in order to revert to an older version of the game where the warp drive was still in the game, which means, again, you lose a lot of the, interface and ease of use features that have been added to Stellaris over the years. Whereas if they could port that content into Star Trek Infinite, you get a little bit more updated gameplay experience. You don't have to worry about maintaining backwards compatibility, or you don't have to worry about having to revert to an older version of the game, because this game isn't going to get further updates, right? Like, it's done. It's closed. So you can do whatever you want with it and not have to worry about future updates breaking it. So I think there's definitely a lot of room here for modders to come in and do a lot of very cool things with Star Trek Infinite, which is the only way that it's going to survive.
Let's keep this polite.
And I hope to see that happen. I'm not terribly optimistic, because the game was not well received when it came out, and people basically abandoned it as soon as Paradox did. But like, just because Paradox isn't supporting the game anymore doesn't mean you can't still play it and have fun with it. And, hopefully there is at least some dedicated, players who will do some good mods.
Let's keep this polite.
If anybody who works on the New Frontiers mod is listening, like, here's my official formal request. Like, if possible, could you please import some of that content into this game? I would love to see some of the original series content from New Frontiers be ported into here. I would love to see like things like the tech tree and the progression of ship unlocks be completely rearranged. I would like to see more playable factions, like the Ferengi, maybe the Gorn, Tholians. I don't know if it would be possible to expand this game into the Gamma and Delta quadrants via modding. Like, I don't know if the underlying game engine or framework allows the map to be expanded in that way. But if so, if we could get the Dominion as a playable faction, that would be awesome. But, I mean, I would be content with just Alpha and Beta Quadrants. And maybe what even they can do is, even if the Gamma Quadrant isn't in the game, you could still potentially have just have the Bajoran wormhole, right, in the game, and make it so that, like, the Dominion is like an endgame boss kind of thing, where they come in through the wormhole and you got to fight them off and stuff like that. You can potentially have a Dominion war kind of scenario going on, and maybe the Dominion can even still be playable. Somehow, it's just like you have to come through the wormhole. So, yeah, if anybody who works on New Frontiers is listening, can you maybe take a look at modding this game? That would be awesome. Please. Thank you. I also still have unused edicts. Like, none of these really jump out to me as, like, things that I really, really want. I don't really need the exploration protocols anymore. I've done a lot of exploration. I've got all my science ships out there. Like, I'm not building new science ships.
Our edict is infallible. Tracking alien vessels.
So, I end up just going with the assured basic services, because... I always feel like Romulans kind of live in luxury. The home planet is very well developed, very technologically advanced. So, we'll go with that. It seems thematically appropriate. And we can see now that it looks like both the Cairna and the Kesprit have actually expanded their borders. So shortly after I did that peace summit at Elven, the Cairna claimed the system and colonized it. Which means that if I do eventually annex them, integrate them, I get that system as well, which means I get multiple systems along the Cardassian border without having to expend as many of my resources to get them. And over on the other end, we have the Kesprit, who also expanded and claimed another star system. So now that means that when I do eventually go to war with them, I'm going to have to take 2 systems instead of just 1. So it'll be a little bit more work. But hopefully with my cloaking device and larger fleet, which I really need to start building up here because I still only have a pretty small, pretty weak fleet. I haven't checked up on the size of the Klingon fleet for a while, but I would imagine it's probably gotten even bigger, so it might now be 3 times the size of the Romulan fleet.
We will respect your privacy.
Let's keep this polite.
How may we serve you?
Let's keep this polite.
A new tradition.
Go on.
Unravel
We're
our
listening.
mysteries.
This was another thing that I didn't quite expect to see. So the Romulans have a lot of interesting minor races up here. So we have the Ferengi, now we've met the Elorians, which, don't quite work the same way as all the other minor factions. They also let you do, like, training and stuff like that with them.
Go on. We're listening. Go on.
They do have an actual home planet, though, unlike the Ferengi. Well, sort of. I mean, I guess they actually are more like the Ferengi in that they just have a base instead of an actual homeworld. Like, probably because they're, right, this is kind of considered a colony, right? They had to build an outpost here because their homeworld was destroyed by the Borg.
We will respect your privacy. Let's keep this polite. How may we serve you? We have surveyed a new astronomical region.
Construction successful. Research finalized. Our technological genius amazed.
And here I have the technological choice between spy stuff or diplomatic envoys. So I'm going to take the spy stuff because, Romulan.
We have surveyed a new astronomical.
Right, so now I'm really starting to go into military building mode. I have a pretty large chunk of energy coming in. I'm, plus over 100 energy per month, so I can start selling that for alloys on a pretty regular basis. My alloy production is still pretty weak, so I'm probably going to need to build some more metallurgy districts and stuff like that. But I'm also building star bases, and I'm going to start upgrading those star bases with shipyards and stuff like that, so that I have, forward operating bases against the Kesprit. I also have I think it's called the Vindius ship type, is currently being researched. And one thing in particular that I wanted to do is make sure that I have a outpost or a star base near Cardassian space. So in case I need to quickly mobilize a fleet there, if hostilities break out, I want the starbase to be able to defend the system, but then I also want to be able to build ships there. And now I have claims against both of the systems that the Kesprit own, so if I go to war with them and I capture both systems, I'll actually be able to annex them at the end of the war. Otherwise, I think even if the Kesprit surrender, I'd only have one system or the other.
Our ships have gained a new advantage.
I also need to make sure that I have an energy world that's going to be able to take over the majority of my energy production after the Romulan sun explodes. So that will be Kendira Prime.
Research finalized. Our technological genius amazes even...
All right, and now I have access to the Vindius. I guess, would they be considered light cruisers? Or are they destroyers? I think the Ferax is considered a destroyer. I think the Vindius is going to be considered a light cruiser. But anyway, I'm going to have to build a few of those to be flagships for my fleet, while the Federation and the Cardassians duke it out amongst themselves, possibly thanks to all of my spy meddling, framing them for sabotage against each other. Looks like that might have paid off. And we can see that it looks like they've captured each other's planets. You can see down on the bottom left of the screen there, looks like the Cardassians invaded Denobula, and looks like the Federation took out the outpost on, what is it, Amleth? So there's definitely some action going on down there, but in classic Romulan fashion, I'm just kind of sitting back and watching them beat each other up and give each other bloody noses. And my fleet is slowly growing in strength. I'm up to, what is this, almost 800 military strength, although I haven't checked in on the Klingons recently, so I don't know how strong their fleet is.
Tradition past. New discovery to investigate.
Alright, and once again, as I mentioned before, it looks like Devron is a planet that I will be colonizing at some, or claiming at some point, so I will go ahead and take the passive resource generation. And in this one, I'm just going to go ahead and take the research. Like I said, Romulans like to study things before they take any decisive actions. And even though I'm building these fleets in order to invade Kesprit, I'm building them at the Senvadi starbase, A, so that I can build them in parallel with the Romulus starbase, but also because I do want a military presence at the Cardassian border, just in case. Hopefully, when I do invade the Kesprit, I can send my fleets from the Cardassian border to Kesprit, and then as soon as that conflict is resolved, send them back to the Cardassian border without the Cardassians getting, frisky and trying to take the opportunity to invade my space while it's undefended. But, that's something that we'll just have to see when it happens. And another thing that you may have noticed is that I have made a conscious effort to avoid surveying any of the black holes or warp highway nodes. And the reason for that is because I'm specifically trying to avoid starting the Borg quest line until I'm in a position where I feel more comfortable with taking that on. Because I have other stuff that I want to do early in the Romulan campaign, and I don't want any weird Borg stuff happening, while I'm conquering minor races or worried about the Klingons or Cardassians at my borders. So for now, we're just going to kind of avoid dealing with these black holes, and we'll come back around to it later when it's convenient.
Let's keep this polite.
Alright, so one of the first things that I want to do before actually going to war with the Kesprit is we're going to make sure we get a little bit of espionage done and gather some intelligence. So I'm going to recruit a new spy so that I don't have to take spies away from, their propaganda campaigns against like the Klingons and the Cardassians. And I'm going to send this new spy to the Kesprit system in order to just check out the size of their fleets and, any defensive infrastructure that they have in place. So that I will know whether or not my fleets are actually big enough and whether I need to build more ships. And, like, right now my fleets aren't particularly well. I have less than 1,000, total points of combat strength. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to build more ships. But, the Kesprit is a minor faction, so their fleet probably won't be too big. I might, at this point, have enough to take them, but probably not, and our spy will figure that out. Alright, our spy has arrived in the Kesprit system. We're gonna hack the starbase to try to lower some of its defenses. My scouts are gonna go over and try to make first contact with the Lesepians. And even though I do not want to settle any more systems near the Cardassians, I think it's probably a good idea to at least start exploring some of these systems, find out what's over there. Maybe there's some more minor factions that I can trade with, even though I probably wouldn't want to conquer any minor factions over in that area, at least not for the time being, because, then that would potentially be... it would be considered incursions into the Cardassian sphere of influence, so I will avoid that for now.
Construction successful. We have surveyed a new astronomical region. Research finalized. New discovery to investigate. Construction permitted.
Alright, so let's see what their military power is. They've got a space station alone that's worth almost 250 combat strength, so that's one of my whole fleets. And there's the Romulan sun acting up again. That's not that important. We got wars to fight. Or so the sun blowing up, it's not that big a deal.
Let's keep this polite.
And since I'm not actually surveying these systems, like, I've talked about this before, but the game doesn't actually save, like, what's in the system, so you can only see it while a ship is there. So if there are, like, M-class planets or whatever, and I leave this system without surveying it, I will not be able to see that there are M-class planets there anymore. So that's kind of why I stopped. But I think right now I don't really care about finding M-class planets. Specifically what I'm looking for is civilizations. And I think I kind of know that there should be a civilization somewhere in this general area from having, played some of the other campaigns. So, I'm just trying to look to meet as many as I can so that I can get trade relations with them, so that I can keep my economy running, like especially once the friggin' sun explodes and I don't have my most economically profitable system available to me anymore. I'm going to need all the trade I can get. And so now I think it looks like we're finally ready to declare war on the Kesprit. So first things first, this is a paradox game, so you have to set your war goals, and the war goals basically affect how you win the war, and also, like, what the rewards for winning the war are. So by selecting conquest as the goal, I'm saying that I want to actually take control of their systems. Whereas if I had just chosen humiliate, then even after I win the war, I wouldn't actually take control of the Kesprit systems. Instead, it would just be like, a backhand to them, to put them in their place, and not really take any actual territory. Basically, the humiliate option war goal is basically we're declaring war because we just want to be dicks decision, as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm sure there's like other strategic uses for it that, veterans of other Paradox games or Stellaris in particular could probably explain to me, but if there's other uses for the humiliate war goal, please feel free to put them in the comments, because as far as I've been able to tell so far, it's basically just the be a dick button. So now, another important thing is, because I have 2 fleets, and one of the fleets is like really small, and then I've got a friggin' presidential election coming up right as soon as I declare war. Maybe not the best idea, probably would have been better to wait for the new administration or get this done under the previous administration, but, whatever. So, anyway, one of the fleets is a fraction of the size of the other fleet and would be easily outgunned by the Kesprit fleets and the Starbase. So what I've made sure to do is I made sure that they meet up with each other at the edge of the system,
Tracking alien vessels.
so that they can attack together. Because if that one smaller fleet is able to get focus fired, it's going to be annihilated like that. And probably before I can get reinforcements there. But having both fleets together means that the Kesprit need to split their attack between the 2 fleets, and they'll both be much more likely to survive. And I tried to, zoom in and get a good angle where you could hopefully see how the cloaking device worked. Like the ships were kind of, grayed out and partially, translucent. And then, basically they just decloak and fire. All the Romulan cloaking device is in this game is a first strike. And it happens, automatically. You don't have to click a button on your ships to, engage the cloaking device or anything like that. And then once the first strike is done, that's basically it. So the cloaking device isn't great. I don't even think you could use the cloaking device to discreetly pass by enemy ships without being detected. If you wanted to bypass their border defenses and go deeper into their territory, I don't even think that's something you can do with the Romulan cloaking device in this game, which is, I think, kind of silly. I mean, obviously there should be limitations to that sort of thing, but that's one of the big perks of having a cloaking device, is being able to make those, undetected, hit and run attacks. I think one of the big limiting factors to something like that should just be the fact that, you don't have supply lines, right? Your ships aren't able to repair themselves. They aren't able to get crew replacements. They aren't able to get, fuel or whatever. If they need deuterium or they need another friggin' quantum singularity to power their warp drive. But you're deep inside enemy space and have not taken control of the enemy territory in between, then you don't have supply lines, right? So that would be, the big disadvantage to using the cloak to go deep into enemy territory, is you shouldn't be able to repair your ship or replace your crew or do other sort of maintenance and repair sort of things like that, which should, mean that the usefulness of that fleet is very limited, and it should not take long before you have to retreat back into your own territory to resupply and repair. And other games like Total War will even have mechanics, they'll have attrition mechanics, where your armies will actually lose health and soldiers will die while you're marching through enemy territory. And the deeper into enemy territory, the worse that effect becomes, and the more likely it is that you're going to lose a large fraction of your force just moving around and not even fighting. And then by the time you actually meet an enemy army in the field, your army's already depleted and tired and in poor health, and then you get your ass kicked. So those are the kinds of limiting factors that you should have. So we've now taken control of the outpost on Kesprit, but the Kesprit do have 2 systems, so I do need to capture both of them. I think it's crazy that capturing their capital world only gave me 7 points towards completing the war goals. You'd think that would be a majority of what you need, but it's not. So I also am going to need to fight their their second system, and thankfully I just got that event that just gave me a bunch of free mercenary ships. So I'm going to send those mercenary ships there and use them as cannon fodder, because, like, as far as I know, I don't get to keep those ships after the war ends. And, like, again, as far as I know, they don't, like, belong to, like, some minor faction or some other power that I have diplomatic relationships, such that, like, getting all of their ships destroyed and their crew killed is, like, going to hurt diplomatic relationships. That's not going to happen. So, as far as I know, they are just complete cannon fodder, and there is no risk or penalty to me to just get them all killed. So I'll send them in first, and then I'll send my own fleets in as backup, you know, in case they get overwhelmed, and mop up what's in Tem Daron, however the heck you are supposed to pronounce that. Even that is not going to be enough to end the war. Like, I think I'm going to have to occupy the planets for a short period of time. And if they have other ships or fleets wandering around, I'll probably have to find those and destroy those too. Because just capturing 2 systems does not generate a whole lot of progress towards war goals, even though they only have 2 systems. Like, you would think capturing that second outpost would just be the end of the war, because I control all of their space. But no, you still have to land troops on the planet, which, fine, that makes sense. And, you know, you might have to do other stuff too. So... Alright, and so now actually capturing the planet did indeed give me a majority of the progress towards the war goals. Now I'm up to 63%. I have to double check, make sure that's not 83%. Like, the fonts in these games are really friggin' tiny. It's one of the downsides to computer monitors getting such high resolution is, like, fonts and graphics and stuff start to get harder and harder and harder to read and decipher. Even though I'm sitting, like, a foot from the screen, stuff's still hard to read. This is why I'm going to miss having my gaming laptop with the 17.5-inch display. Yeah, that was my old laptop with 17.5 inches. It was great. I mean, it was huge and bulky and not super portable, and it was hard to carry around places. I had to buy, like, a special bag for it, because, like, standard laptop bags weren't big enough to hold it. But now I've got a new gaming laptop, which I had to buy in order to play City Skylines 2, because my old laptop's graphics card didn't have, like, ray tracing and volumetric effects and stuff like that, and City Skylines 2 requires those things in order to even run. So I had to buy a new gaming laptop with the, you know, higher-end graphics card. And unfortunately, the ones in my price range were, you know, regular-sized laptops, so I did not get a jumbo-size 17.5-inch screen, unfortunately. If I ever get a nice windfall of cash, I might consider upgrading to a gaming laptop with a larger screen, because I'm spoiled, but unfortunately I can't afford that at the moment. Alright, so our mercenaries made quick work of the Kesprit fleets that were on this world. So, next up is, I guess, just going to be taking out the outpost, and then we're going to send our armies over there, and that should pretty much do it for the Kesprit. And our friggin' war goal percentage actually went down. I'm guessing probably because of casualties we took in that fight, even though we, like, wiped out their fleet. But... yeah, there's weird stuff like that in the way that Paradox games handle, like, war score. It doesn't always make sense. And one of the things that I do like about turn-based games is not having all these friggin' pop-ups coming up when you're in the middle of doing something, like telling you that there's something else to do. Like, I kind of wish that, like, these notifications would just appear, like, as notifications on the top of the screen, and I could click on them at my leisure, but so many of them are time-sensitive that doesn't really, like, work. Like, there are things that genuinely need to be dealt with, like, now. And you don't get that with turn-based games. Turn-based games, you get to do stuff at your leisure and without interruption, which is nice. And you get to choose the order in which you do things, resolve things in your turn. So, that's one of the big reasons why I prefer games like Civilization over, real-time games like StarCraft or, even these, Paradox games like Stellaris and like this. It was nice in Star Trek Birth of the Federation to be able to, go through all my planets at my own leisure and, do all the build queue stuff, when I want, and then fight all the battles that I want to fight. Well, actually, I guess that game didn't let me do that either, because all the battles happened between turns. So, that's kind of like a halfway in between Civilization and this.
Construction permitted. Construction permitted.
And then there was also games like Humankind. Like, something that I actually kind of like about Humankind is the way that it's so it has turn-based tactical combat that's similar to like Civilization 5 and Civilization 6. But you get to stack your armies into little stacks. And then when they meet other armies in the field, then you get to deploy them. And like the battle kind of happens in like its own little thing. So it's not completely resolved on the main campaign map the way that a battle in Civ 5 or Civ 6 would, where it takes place over multiple turns of controlling all the units. Instead, in Humankind, when you have a battle, you get 3 rounds of battle that happen all in one campaign turn. So what that does is it makes wars a lot shorter in terms of campaign turns and like the number of the amount of time that it takes like within the world. So in like Civ, you easily have wars that go on for hundreds of years. In Humankind, like a war is going to be done in like maybe a few years, maybe a couple decades, because you basically get 3 times as much combat done in a single campaign game round as you would in like say Civ. But then the downside to that is Humankind has a bunch of weird rules for like how reinforcement armies work, and there's like a limited size for the arena in which your units can, like it's on the main campaign map, but it delineates like a limited area where the battle can actually happen, and you can't move your units outside of that space, like even if you want to like flank the enemy units or something like that. So like there's weird scaling things and weird rules for reinforcements and stuff like that make it not ideal, but I do really like the way that it lets you have large scale battles that occur within a single game round. That's kind of neat. It just speeds things up and makes the campaign, and it also gives you a lot more time, a lot more peacetime during your campaigns. Because the wars are resolved quicker, you then get back into peace, and then you have more turns where you get to spend just like, building things and whatever, settling new cities, all that sort of stuff. And, sorry, I shouldn't be talking about Humankind. I'm supposed to be talking about Star Trek Infinite. But hey, this is why you watch these videos, right? Because you like to listen to me ramble about different games and design concepts and what I like and don't like, right? But anyway, while I was on that tangent about like Humankind, we did win the war against the Kesprit, and because our war goal was conquest, we take control of both of the systems that they own, and now the Kesprit are just out of the game. Like all of their other ships and stuff have just disappeared. The Kesprit are now completely subjugated by the Romulan Empire, and I think I'm going to... I don't know if I've already done it or not, but I'm going to choose to make them basically slaves. And I think later on I'm going to be distributing their population to other Romulan planets that have open jobs. Because they're basically just going to be a slave workforce now. Even though I do need population points on the Kesprit worlds to work those jobs, those can be Romulan. We'll get Romulans in there to work all the nice jobs, and we'll put Kesprit to work doing all the menial labor and stuff like that. Because that's something this game lets you do. And that's something that the Romulans would do. So, that's what we're going to do. Even though it's, evil. And then we've also got a bunch of debris from all the different battles, which we can scan and reverse engineer, new technologies and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and try to do as much of that as we can. Hopefully we get all of it before they expire. And maybe we'll learn a few new techs as well. That'll maybe hopefully put us ahead of some of the other major factions in the game. Man, the Kesprit sure did like bureaucracy. Looked like they had 2 admin centers there.
Research finalized.
And I think that technology that we just learned was something that we learned from studying debris, so it was not one of the projects that we were actively researching. It was something else on the tech tree where we just got points for it and unlocked that in addition to what we are actively researching. I really wish that this outliner would do a better job of telling me when planets have really low stability. I don't think it marks that anywhere on the outliner, and that's something that I really think it should, considering how, impactful the penalties for that can be. And we did, in fact, meet a minor faction over there, just like I thought we would. So now we can use that science ship for other things. Probably not worth trying to fly it back to the Kesprit to scan debris, because I think we're going to have all that done with the one science ship that's already there. So it would just fly there and have to fly back. No point in even trying.
Construction permitted.
And now, having researched the Tal Shiar, things get interesting, because now I'm going to have to make choices between whether we want to conquer Vulcan or peacefully reunify. So that is something that we will think about in the next episode, along with dealing with that pesky Homeworld supernova issue. Next episode we will probably have the Romulan sun explode, and we'll have to relocate all our population before that happens. So if you want to see that, and also hear more of my thoughts about Star Trek Picard, and maybe also, the other newer Star Trek shows that have come out on like CBS or Paramount Plus streaming services and so forth. I hope you'll come back and check that out. So the next episode is, of course, going to be a Patreon exclusive. So if you do want to see that and listen to more of my mindless ramblings, you can become a patron for, just $1 or $2 a month. That's all it takes. And you'll get access to that. And if I actually get people watching these, then I'll do more. I might consider doing the Cardassian campaign. Right now, I'm leaning towards probably not, because, this isn't getting a whole lot of activity right now, but maybe I will. We'll see. So, hope to see you next time, and live long and prosper. Or, better yet, Jolon True.
Research finalized. Our technological genius amazes even us. Research finalized. Our technological genius amazes even us. Research finalized. Our technological genius amazes even us. Construction permitted. Construction permitted. Construction permitted. All traces of previous damage removed from our ships.